Close your eyes. Picture the Roman Colosseum. You probably see a hero. Strong, noble, with a gleaming sword, standing on sun-baked sand. You hear the roar of the crowd, a sound of pure glory. This is the movie version, the legend we all know and love. It's an image of power, honor, and spectacular entertainment. A place where legends were born, and the fate of an empire was reflected in the fate of a single fighter. It feels grand, epic, and strangely heroic. But this picture is a beautiful, dangerous lie. The question isn't just about fighting. It's about survival. Could you truly survive a single day in the real Roman Colosseum? Not the movie version, but the loud, filthy, terrifying reality. The answer is far more complicated and far more brutal than you might think. Tonight, we are going to forget the heroic music and the slow-motion action shots. We are going to take a journey back in time to experience one full day at the games. From sunrise to sunset, we will see what the people saw and smell what they smelled. This journey is not about glory. It's about the grime, the heat, the noise, and the constant, overwhelming presence of death. We're going to peel back the layers of myth to find the shocking, messy, and deeply human truth of Rome's greatest spectacle. So find a comfortable spot, let the world around you fade away. We are not just learning about history tonight. We are going to try and live it, to understand what it felt like to be there, in that vast and terrible arena. Our day begins not in the arena, but in the sprawling, chaotic city of Rome itself. The sun is not yet fully up, but the city is already awake and screaming with life. The air is thick, with the smoke of countless cooking fires and the smell of humanity. You are just one person in a city of 1,000,000 souls, and today is a game day. You can feel it in the air. A current of excitement, of nervous energy, flows through the packed streets and narrow alleyways. Everyone is heading in one direction. The journey to the Colosseum is your first test of survival. The streets are a river of people. Rich citizens in their clean robes, carried by slaves, push past poor workers in their rough tunics. Everyone is packed together, shouting, sweating, and pushing forward. Vendors line the streets, screaming about their wares. They sell cheap wine, roasted meats, and little clay tokens that are supposed to bring good luck to the fighters. The noise is a physical force, a constant barrage of sound that presses in on you from all sides. As you get closer, the great building rises before you. It is larger than anything you have ever seen, a mountain of stone and arches that blots out the sky. It seems impossible that mere mortals could have built such a thing. It is both magnificent and intimidating. You have your ticket, a small piece of pottery called a tessera. It has a number on it, telling you exactly which entrance to use and where your seat is. There is no choosing your spot here. Your place in the Colosseum is decided by your place in society. The rich and powerful, the senators and officials, will sit down below, close to the action, protected from the sun by a massive canvas awning. They have the best views, cushioned seats, and a comfortable experience. But that is not where you are going. You are heading up, and up, and up. You climb steep, dark stone stairways, the air growing hotter and more stale with every step. You are going to the cheap seats, the very top of the arena, where the poor, the common, and the non-citizens sit. Finally, you emerge into the light. From up here, the oval of the arena floor looks small, a world away. You find your spot on a hard stone bench, packed tightly with other people. The sun is already beating down, and there is no shade here. This is your world for the day. A hard seat, a burning sun, and the company of thousands of loud, sweating strangers. Down below, the perfectly white sand of the arena floor waits. It looks clean, pure, and ready for the show to begin. But that sand is a fresh lie, laid down to cover the stains of the day before. Because the Colosseum was not just used for special occasions. It was a near-constant factory of entertainment, and its primary product was death. The clean sand is just temporary. The show is about to start. A trumpet blast echoes through the stadium, and a wave of sound rises from the 50,000 people around you. The excitement is real. It is contagious. Despite the heat in the crowd, you feel a thrill of anticipation. But what are you about to see? If you are expecting a parade of heroic gladiators to kick things off, you are mistaken. The main event is hours away. The day does not begin with honorable combat. It begins with something far more primal. The morning belongs to the beasts. The first part of the show is called the Venatio, the Great Animal Hunt, and it is about to begin. The gates on the arena floor slide open, and the first act of our day of survival emerges into the sun. The crowd lets out a collective gasp, a sound of awe and delight. But what comes out of the dark tunnel is not a majestic, proud lion from a movie. It is a group of terrified ostriches. They blink in the sudden, blinding sunlight, their long necks moving in panic jerks. They have no idea where they are or what is happening. They were captured thousands of miles away, kept in darkness, and now they are pushed into a vast, screaming space. They run, not with grace, but with frantic, clumsy terror, trying to find an escape that does not exist. The crowd laughs at their confusion. This is not a noble hunt. It is the spectacle of pure fear, and for the audience, it is the perfect way to start the day's entertainment. It is a simple, bloody appetizer. Soon after, a new gate opens. From the shadows emerges a bear, a large brown beast captured from the mountains of Europe. It looks thin, and its fur is matted. It sniffs the air, growling low in its chest, confused by the roar of 50,000 humans. Then, from another gate, a group of men enters the arena. They are not gladiators. They do not wear armor or carry noble swords. They are the bestiarii, the beast hunters. They carry long spears and wear little more than leather wraps for protection. Their job is not to have a fair fight. Their job is to kill the animal, as quickly and as spectacularly as possible. They spread out, forming a circle around the confused bear, their spears pointed inward. The bear rears up, roaring in defiance, but it is hopelessly outnumbered and outmaneuverable in this wide-open space. The fight, if you can call it that, is short and ugly. The men jab at the bear with their spears, forcing it to charge one of them. While it is distracted, others rush in from the sides and behind, driving their weapons deep into its flesh. The sand, so clean just moments ago, is now stained dark red. The bear slumps to the ground, its life draining away onto the arena floor. The crowd cheers, but it is not the sound of people appreciating skill. It is the sound of a bloodlust being satisfied. Before the bear's body has even been dragged away by slaves, the next gate is opening. The show must go on, and the pace is relentless. This is just one of dozens of animals that will die this morning. The sheer variety of the slaughter is what the crowd truly craves. They have seen bears and lions before. The emperor and the game organizers, the editors, must constantly find new and exotic creatures to keep the audience entertained. A shipment might arrive from Egypt, bringing crocodiles to be hunted in a shallow pool of water set up in the arena. Another might bring rhinos from Africa, whose thick hide makes them difficult to kill, prolonging the spectacle. Deer, wild boars, leopards, and even elephants were slaughtered on the sand. Sometimes, the animals were pitted against each other, a bull against a pack of wolves, a lion against a tiger. These pairings were often unnatural and resulted in a confused, chaotic mess of violence rather than a true battle. Let's think about the smell for a moment. The sun is climbing higher in the sky, beating down on the stone seats and the sand below. The heat intensifies the stench of 50,000 unwashed bodies packed together. But now, a new smell is added to the mix. It is the hot, metallic smell of blood rising in waves from the arena floor. It is the smell of opened bodies and animal fear. The Romans tried to combat this. They had a system of pipes that could spray a fine mist of perfumed water over the crowd, and they burned incense in large urns placed throughout the stadium. But these measures could only do so much. They were fighting a losing battle against the overwhelming odor of an industrial-scale slaughterhouse operating under the hot Italian sun. Now, something different happens. A new set of doors opens, and out comes not a fearsome beast, but a man. He is unarmed. He wears no armor, only simple rags. He is a Noxious, a condemned criminal. His crime might have been anything from robbery to rebellion. His sentence is death in the arena. A gate on the opposite side opens, and this time, a pack of starved hunting dogs is released. The man has nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The crowd watches in silence for a moment, and then the screaming begins. This is not a hunt. It is an execution, performed as a public service and a form of entertainment. The man's survival is not in question. He has no chance. His death is the entire point of the display. As the morning wears on, the sun becomes a relentless enemy for those in the upper seats. There is no escape from it. People would bring cushions to sit on and hats to wear, but the heat was oppressive. The vast canvas awning, the velarium, that covered much of the Colosseum was a marvel of engineering maneuvered by hundreds of sailors. But it only protected the wealthy and important spectators in the lower tiers. For the common people at the top, a day at the games was also a battle against heat stroke and sunburn. You would feel the sweat running down your back, your throat dry with thirst. You would be distracted by the discomfort, yet your eyes would remain glued to the violent spectacle below. The Colosseum was a shining emblem of Roman power, but for the animals brought there, it was an unnatural hell. Imagine a leopard, born in the mountains of Persia. It lived its life in the wild, a perfect predator in its own environment. Then it is trapped, caged, and put onto a ship for a terrifying journey across the sea. It spends weeks or months in a dark, cramped box, finally arriving in Rome. It is kept in the pitch-black tunnels beneath the Colosseum, the hypogeum, surrounded by the roars and smells of other terrified creatures. Then, a door opens, and it is forced up a ramp into a world of blinding light and deafening noise, a place that makes no sense. This was the fate of thousands upon thousands of animals, a testament to the empire's reach and its bottomless appetite for disposable lives. The morning show finally winds down as the sun reaches its highest point in the sky. The sand is a ruin soaked with blood and littered with the bodies of dozens of animals. Slaves rush out onto the arena floor, a grim cleanup crew. They work quickly, dragging the carcasses out through a large gate known as the Gate of Death. Other slaves follow with rakes and shovels, turning over the red sand and covering it with a fresh, clean layer. They are erasing the evidence of the morning's butchery, preparing the stage for the next act. The crowd begins to stir. Many people in the upper tiers, who could not afford to leave and come back, would eat their lunch right there in their seats. A piece of bread, some cheese, and a flask of cheap wine. This is the midday lull. You might think it is a time for a peaceful break, a moment to digest your food and rest your senses. You would be wrong. The organizers of the games knew that a bored crowd was a dangerous crowd. There could be no empty moments. So while the wealthy might leave to enjoy a proper lunch, the masses were treated to the day's second major event, the public executions. This was considered the low point of the day's entertainment, the least prestigious part of the show. Yet it was a crucial element of Roman justice and social control, and it was just as popular as the hunts or the fights to come. The Noxii, the condemned, were about to provide the lunchtime show. The executions were not simple or quick. They were designed to be theatrical moral lessons delivered with maximum cruelty. One of the most popular forms was the quote, fatal charade, where criminals were forced to reenact scenes from Roman mythology, always ending in their real death. A man might be dressed as the hero Hercules. He would be led to a decorated wooden platform, a pyre. The crowd would watch as the story unfolded, and at the climax, the pyre would be set on fire, and the man would be burned alive. Another criminal might be forced to play the part of Icarus, given a set of fake wings, and then thrown from a great height to his death on the arena floor. It was a gruesome fusion of religion, theater, and capital punishment. Not all executions were so elaborate. Some were brutally simple. Prisoners of war or captured rebels might be brought out, completely unarmed, and forced to fight each other to the death. The last man standing would not win his freedom. He would simply be killed by a waiting soldier. This was a way to dispose of enemies of the state while providing a grim spectacle. Other times, criminals were simply handed over to the beasts. A man would be tied to a stake in the middle of the arena, and a hungry lion or a bear would be released. The crowd would watch as the animal, sometimes prodded into action by handlers, would maul the helpless victim to death. It was a raw display of the state's power over life and death. Imagine being one of those condemned prisoners in the moments before you are sent out. You are held in a dark cell beneath the arena. You can hear the roar of the crowd above, a sound that is not for you but is about you. You know that you are going to die, and your death will be a form of entertainment for thousands of strangers. You are stripped of your name, your identity, and your humanity. You are no longer a person. You are an object, a prop in a state-sponsored play about crime and punishment. The sheer psychological terror of that weight is almost impossible to comprehend. For these individuals, survival was never an option. Their role in the day's events was simply to die. The reaction of the crowd to these midday horrors was complex. Some were certainly horrified or disgusted. The Roman writer Seneca famously complained about the executions, saying he came back from the games more cruel and less human. But for many, this was a normal part of life. They saw it as justice being served. These were criminals, traitors, and enemies who deserved their fate. The executions reinforced the social order, reminding everyone of the consequences of breaking the law. They ate their lunch, they chatted with their neighbors, and they watched people die, all as a normal part of a day out. It was a routine spectacle of state-sanctioned violence that has no modern equivalent. As the cleanup crew comes out one more time to prepare the sand, the energy in the Colosseum begins to shift. The sun is starting to descend from its peak, and the heat is becoming slightly less oppressive. The morning's animal hunts and the grim midday executions are over. The appetizers and the grim entr'acte have been served. Now, it is time for the main event. This is what everyone has been waiting for. The trumpets sound again, this time with a different, more glorious tune. A great gate at one end of the arena swings open, and the stars of the show finally make their entrance. The gladiators have arrived. They march in a grand procession, a parade known as the Pompa. They are dressed in elaborate costumes, with brightly colored cloaks and plumed helmets. They carry their weapons, but they are not yet ready for battle. This is a moment of theater, a chance for the crowd to see the fighters, to pick their favorites, and to begin placing their bets. The gladiators march around the edge of the arena, their faces set in grim expressions. They are a mixture of men. Some are slaves, bought and trained specifically for this purpose. Others are prisoners of war who chose the life of a gladiator over immediate execution. A few are even free men, desperate for money or fame, who volunteered for this life. Let's dismantle the myth of the heroic gladiator. While a few very successful fighters could achieve a kind of celebrity status, the vast majority were not heroes. They were property. They belonged to a lanista, a man who owned and trained them in a school called a ludus. Their lives were incredibly hard and disciplined. They lived in barracks, under constant guard. Their diet, contrary to the image of muscle-bound strongmen, was mostly vegetarian. They were nicknamed the hordeiri, or barley eaters, because their diet consisted mainly of barley, beans, and dried fruit. This high-carb diet was cheap and effective at putting a layer of fat over their muscles, which helped protect them from minor cuts and nerve damage during a fight. The procession ends before the emperor's box. The gladiators raise their weapons in a salute. The famous line from movies, "We who are about to die salute you," is likely a historical misinterpretation. It was recorded only once, during a special naval battle staged by the Emperor Claudius, and it was said by criminals, not gladiators. The gladiators themselves had a chance to live. They were expensive investments. A lanista did not want to see his prizefighter killed in his first match. The goal was not necessarily to kill your opponent, but to win the fight. A gladiator who fought well and survived could fight again and again, earning money for his owner and fame for himself. The first pairing is announced. A retiarius, or netman, steps forward. He is lightly armored, wearing only a loincloth and a metal guard on his left shoulder and arm. His weapons are a weighted net, a long trident, and a small dagger. He is quick and agile. His opponent is a secutor, or pursuer. The secutor is heavily armed, with a large rectangular shield, a short sword called a gladius, and a smooth, rounded helmet that covers his entire face, except for two small eye holes. This helmet is designed to prevent the prongs of the trident from getting a hold. This is a classic matchup, speed and range against power and defense. The fight begins. The retiarius dances around the edge of the arena, keeping his distance, looking for the right moment to cast his net. The secutor moves forward slowly, methodically, his shield held high, trying to corner his faster opponent. The crowd watches intently, shouting encouragement to their favorite. The fight is a tense, strategic dance. It is not a wild, chaotic brawl. These men are highly trained specialists. Each move is calculated. A misstep by the retiarius could allow the secutor to get too close. A moment of hesitation by the secutor could leave him entangled in the net, helpless against the trident. This is a deadly chess match, and the stakes are life and death. Suddenly, the retiarius sees his opening. He flings the net. It unfurls perfectly and lands over the secutor, who stumbles and falls to the sand. The crowd roars. The retiarius moves in with his trident, aiming for a finishing blow. But the secutor is not finished. He rolls, tangling the net around his own body but also pulling the retiarius off balance. He drops his shield and draws his sword, cutting himself free from the ropes. He scrambles to his feet just as the retiarius recovers. Now they are closer. The trident, less effective at this range. The advantage has shifted. The fight continues, a desperate struggle of strength and endurance under the hot sun. Finally, the secutor lands a decisive blow. His sword finds a gap in the retiarius's defense, and the netman cries out in pain, falling to one knee. He has been wounded, and he knows he cannot continue the fight. He drops his trident and raises one finger on his left hand. This is the signal of surrender. He is admitting defeat and placing his fate in the hands of the editor, the organizer of the games, who is often the emperor himself. The fight is over. The crowd is screaming, a mix of cheers for the victor and shouts about the fate of the loser. The secutor stands over his defeated opponent, waiting for the signal. Now comes the most famous and most misunderstood moment of the games. The fate of the losing gladiator is up for debate. The editor looks to the crowd, gauging their mood. If the gladiator fought bravely and put on a good show, the crowd might call for him to be spared. They would wave handkerchiefs or shout, "Mitte," which means, "Let him go." If he fought poorly or seemed cowardly, they might call for his death, shouting, "Jugula," which means, "Kill him." The popular image of a thumbs down for death is likely a myth from a 19th century painting. The actual signal for death was probably a thumb pointed towards the throat, a clear and unmistakable gesture to finish the job. In this case, the retiarius fought well. The crowd is pleased with the spectacle. The emperor, seeing this, gives the signal for mercy. The retiarius is allowed to live. He will be taken back to the gladiatorial school, where his wounds will be treated by doctors. He has survived to fight another day. He is a valuable asset, and his owner is relieved not to have lost his investment. The victorious secutor makes a lap of honor around the arena, soaking in the cheers of the crowd. For him, this is a moment of glory. But for both men, the reality is that their lives are still not their own. They are just performers in a system that profits from their blood. Let's go beneath the sand for a moment. While the fight is happening in the blinding sun above, a completely different world exists just below. This is the hypogeum, a complex, two-story network of tunnels, cells, and mechanical lifts that was the backstage of the Colosseum. It was a place of darkness, lit only by torches that filled the air with smoke. The noise was a terrifying mix of roaring animals in their cages, the shouting of stagehands, the creaking of wooden elevators, and the distant, muffled roar of the crowd above. The smell was even worse than in the stands, a concentrated stench of unwashed bodies, animal waste, fear, and blood. Imagine you are a stagehand working in the hypogeum. Your job is one of the most dangerous in Rome. You are not a fighter, but you are surrounded by death. Your task is to move caged lions and bears into position beneath one of the many trapdoors that dot the arena floor. At the right signal, you and your team have to operate a complex system of ropes and pulleys to hoist the cage, or the gladiator, or the scenery up into the arena. A mistake could be fatal. An escaped animal in these narrow corridors would mean certain death. The psychological pressure of working in this dark, terrifying factory of death must have been immense. The hypogeum was the engine that made the spectacle possible. It contained everything needed for a day of games. There were armories filled with weapons, cells for the prisoners scheduled for execution, and quarters for gladiators waiting for their turn to fight. There were even elaborate stage sets, like trees and rocks, that could be hoisted into the arena to create a forest for an animal hunt. This underground world allowed for the famous surprise entrances. A gladiator could be fighting his opponent, and suddenly a trapdoor would fly open, and a lion would appear as if from nowhere, adding a new, terrifying element to the fight. For the crowd, it was magic. For the men below, it was hard, dangerous work in a man-made hell. Back in the arena, the afternoon wears on, with more and more fights. Different types of gladiators are matched against each other in carefully planned pairings. A Myrmio, with his fish-crested helmet and large shield, might fight a Thrax, a Thracian-style fighter with a small square shield and a curved sword designed to strike around his opponent's defenses. Each combination presented a different set of challenges, a different kind of violent spectacle. The crowd would have their favorites, not just individual fighters, but entire classes of gladiators, cheering for the style of combat they found most exciting. It was a sophisticated and well-understood form of entertainment for its time. What about the role of the emperor in all this? He was not just a spectator. He was the host, the ultimate master of ceremonies. The games were a gift to the people of Rome, a fulfillment of the quote and circus's promise that kept the masses happy and distracted. The emperor's every action was watched. How he reacted to a fight, the mercy or cruelty he showed, was a reflection of his character and his politics. A generous and engaging emperor could win the love of the people in the stands. A bored or cruel one could lose it. The Colosseum was as much a political stage as it was a venue for entertainment. As a spectator, you are part of this political theater. Your cheers are a voice, a measure of public opinion. When you scream for a gladiator to be spared, you are participating in the decision. The roar of the crowd had real power. An emperor who consistently went against the wishes of the mob risked becoming unpopular, which was a dangerous thing in Rome. So you are not just a passive observer, you are an active participant in the day's drama, your voice joining with thousands of others to influence the life and death decisions being made on the sand below. It is a heady, intoxicating feeling of power for a common person. Let's consider the medical side of the games. Gladiators were incredibly valuable. The best ones had doctors who were specialists in treating their specific types of injuries. These doctors were some of the most skilled surgeons of their time, developing new techniques to patch up wounds, set broken bones, and keep their fighters alive. When a gladiator was wounded but spared, he would be taken to the, quote, sanitarium, a medical station at the school. There, his wounds would be cleaned and stitched. The survival of a wounded gladiator was a testament not just to his own toughness, but to the advanced medical knowledge that was focused on keeping these human investments profitable. The sun is beginning to set, casting long shadows across the arena. The final fight of the day is announced. It is often the most anticipated matchup, featuring the most famous and skilled gladiators. The crowd, which has been sitting for hours, finds a new reserve of energy. This is the grand finale. The noise level rises once more. The two fighters enter the arena, their armor glowing in the late afternoon light. They are veterans. They have both survived many fights before. They know that this is their last and greatest test of the day. The hopes and bets of thousands of people rest on their shoulders. The fight is a masterclass in skill and endurance. The two gladiators are evenly matched, their movements precise and economical. They have been fighting all day, in a sense, surviving the heat, the noise, and the psychological pressure. Now all that matters is this one final opponent. They trade blows, their weapons clashing, the sound echoing through the now darkening stadium. The crowd is on its feet, screaming, living every moment of the fight. It is a beautiful and terrible ballet of violence, the culmination of everything the day has been building towards. One gladiator finally gains the upper hand. With a final, desperate push, he disarms his opponent and forces him to the ground. The victor stands triumphant, his chest heaving. The loser lies on the sand, exhausted and defeated. He raises his finger, appealing for mercy. The crowd goes wild. They have just witnessed an incredible display of skill and bravery from both men. They scream for the loser to be spared. The emperor, smiling, agrees. He gives the signal for life. Both men have survived. The games are over. As the crowd begins to file out, a different kind of work begins on the arena floor. The day is over for the spectators, but not for the slaves and workers of the Colosseum. They emerge from the gates with torches and carts. Their first job is to deal with the dead. Not all gladiators were as lucky as the ones in the final match. Throughout the afternoon, others had been killed. Their bodies are now collected by men dressed as Charon, the mythical ferrymen of the underworld. They are placed on carts and taken out through the gate of death to be disposed of unceremoniously. The cleanup is a massive undertaking. The sand is once again raked and smoothed. The bloodstains are covered. Any broken weapons or pieces of armor are collected. The entire arena must be cleaned and reset, ready for the next time the games are held. It is a grim, silent process, a stark contrast to the noise and chaos of the day. This is the unseen reality of the Colosseum, the manual labor, the disposal of bodies, the quiet, methodical work of erasing the evidence of the day's carnage so that it can all happen again. You make your way back down the dark stone stairways, your ears still ringing with the echoes of the crowd. You exit the Colosseum into the Roman night. The air is cooler now. The streets are still crowded with people leaving the games, their voices hoarse, excitedly talking about the fights they witnessed. You are exhausted. Your body aches from sitting on the hard stone, your skin is burned from the sun, and your senses are completely overwhelmed. You have survived your day at the Colosseum. So could you have survived it? The question is more than just whether you could win a fight. Could you have survived the sensory overload, the deafening noise, the oppressive heat, the stomach-turning smell of blood and sweat? Could you have survived the psychological toll of watching man and beast slaughtered for entertainment, of seeing casual cruelty on an industrial scale? Could you have survived the sheer, overwhelming reality of it all, so far removed from our clean, sanitized ideas of history? The Roman Colosseum was not just a stadium. It was the heart of Rome, a place that reflected everything the empire was: powerful, organized, brilliant, and breathtakingly brutal. It was a machine for entertainment, powered by a system that considered the lives of thousands of humans and animals to be disposable. To survive a day, there was not to be a hero. It was to be a spectator, lucky enough to be sitting in the stands, and not standing on the sand. It was to watch the show and then be able to walk away. And as you walk away, back into the dark streets of the city, the memory of the day stays with you. It is not a memory of glory, but of a raw, terrifying, and deeply human spectacle. The truth of the Colosseum is that it was a place where the best and the worst of humanity were on display for all to see. And surviving it meant carrying the weight of what you witnessed, long after the cheers had faded to silence. Let's return to the idea of the gladiators' diet for a moment. The Barley Men nickname was not an insult. It was a statement of fact based on modern archaeological evidence. Skeletons found in a gladiator's cemetery in Ephesus showed high levels of strontium, an element found in abundance in ash from burned plants. This, combined with low levels of zinc, points to a diet that was overwhelmingly plant-based. This diet, rich in carbohydrates, would have been cheap for the lanista to provide and would have helped the gladiators bulk up. The extra layer of subcutaneous fat was a form of natural padding, protecting nerves and blood vessels from superficial cuts, which were common in the arena. A cut that might disable a leaner man could be just a flesh wound for a well-fed gladiator. The training at the ludus, or gladiatorial school, was relentless and severe. New recruits, or novicii, would begin by practicing with a rudis, a wooden sword, against a palace, a wooden stake driven into the ground. They were taught by doctores, who were often retired, successful gladiators. The discipline was absolute. Any disobedience could be met with harsh punishment, including whipping or being placed in chains. The goal was to break the man's individual will and rebuild him as a fighter, a part of a unit. They were conditioned to face death without fear, to put on a good show, and to obey the rules of combat. It was a brutal education designed to forge living weapons. Not all gladiators were the same. The different classes of fighters, with their specific sets of armor and weapons, were a key part of the appeal. This system, known as armamentura, ensured that fights were not just random brawls but tactical contests. For example, the heavily armored hoplomachus, who resembled a Greek soldier with a spear and small round shield, was often pitted against the murmio. The hoplomachus had the advantage of range with his spear, but the murmio had a much larger shield for defense. The crowd understood these matchups intimately, like modern sports fans who know the strengths and weaknesses of different teams or players. This created a layer of strategic appreciation on top of the raw violence. Let's talk about the cost. Putting on a day of games was incredibly expensive. The, quote, editor, whether the emperor or a wealthy politician, had to pay for everything. This included acquiring the exotic animals, which could involve complex and costly expeditions to Africa or Asia. It included the cost of leasing the gladiators from their lanista. A successful, famous gladiator could command a huge fee. There was also the cost of feeding the crowd, the bread part of bread in circuses, maintaining the Colosseum itself, and paying the vast staff of workers, from the sailors who operated the awning to the slaves who cleaned the sand. The games were a massive financial undertaking, a display of wealth and generosity intended to win political favor. The underground hypogeum was not part of the original Colosseum design. It was added later by the Emperor Domitian. Before its construction, the arena floor was a simpler wooden structure that could be removed and flooded for mock naval battles known as namachiae. These were incredible spectacles, with specially built ships and thousands of men reenacting famous sea battles. However, once the permanent two-story hypogeum was built with its complex machinery of elevators and trapdoors, the epic naval battles in the Colosseum were no longer possible. The showrunners traded the spectacle of water for the spectacle of surprise, making the underground labyrinth the new heart of the show's machinery. What about women in the Colosseum? They were primarily spectators, and their seating was restricted. According to the reforms of Emperor Augustus, women were relegated to the very top tier of the stadium, in the worst seats, separate from the men. The only exception was for the Vestal Virgins, the priestesses of Rome, who were given a place of honor and a special box. There is also some, albeit limited, evidence of female gladiators, known as gladiatrices. A stone relief found in Halicarnassus depicts two female fighters, named Amazon and Achillea, fighting in full gear. However, this seems to have been a rare novelty rather than a common occurrence, and it was eventually banned by Emperor Septimius Severus. The soundscape of the Colosseum would have been a critical part of the experience. It wasn't just the roar of the crowd, there was also music. Musicians with trumpets, horns, and a type of water organ called a hydraulis would play throughout the games. The music would announce the start of a procession, build tension during a fight, and celebrate a victory. It was the soundtrack to the slaughter. Imagine the surreal experience of hearing lively, festive music playing while two men fought for their lives on the sand below. This combination of celebratory sound and deadly violence was a key part of the disorienting, almost festival-like atmosphere of the games. The crowd was not a single entity. It was a perfect cross-section of Roman society, and your experience of the day depended entirely on who you were. For a senator in the front row, it was a comfortable social and political event. He could chat with his peers, be seen by the emperor, and enjoy the show from a safe, shaded distance. For a poor craftsman in the top tier, it was a rare and precious day of free entertainment, a welcome escape from a life of hard labor, but it was also a physically grueling experience in the baking sun. For a slave attending their master, it was simply another duty, another reminder of their place at the bottom of the social ladder. Let's consider the concept of freedom for a gladiator. The ultimate prize for a successful gladiator was the rudis, the wooden sword he had used in his training. Being awarded the rudis meant that he was a free man. He could retire from fighting. This was the dream that kept many of them going. However, it was a dream that very few achieved. The life expectancy of a gladiator was short. Most would die in the arena or from their wounds after only a handful of fights. Even those who did win their freedom sometimes chose to continue fighting, as it was the only life they knew, and the potential rewards for a famous free gladiator could be substantial. The gambling associated with the games was rampant. People would bet on everything: which gladiator would win a fight, how long a fight would last, even which animal would win in a staged battle. This added another layer of personal investment for the spectators. Their own money was on the line. This financial stake would have made the victories more exhilarating and the losses more painful. The noise of the crowd was not just a cheer for a fighter. It was often the sound of thousands of people winning or losing money at the exact same moment, adding to the chaotic and emotionally charged atmosphere of the day. The sheer scale of the death toll over the centuries is difficult to grasp. It is estimated that in the nearly 400 years that the Colosseum was in active use for games, hundreds of thousands of people died on its sands. This includes gladiators, condemned criminals, and prisoners of war. The number of animals killed is even higher, likely running into the millions. The Colosseum was, in effect, one of the most efficient and long-running killing grounds in human history. Its beautiful architecture and cultural significance cannot hide the simple, brutal fact of what it was primarily used for: the systematic destruction of life for public entertainment. The end of the gladiatorial games was a slow process. The rise of Christianity played a major role. As the new religion spread through the empire, its leaders began to condemn the games as immoral and cruel. The Emperor Honorius is credited with banning gladiatorial fights for good in the early 5th century, supposedly after a monk named Telemachus leaped into the arena to stop a fight and was stoned to death by the angry crowd. Animal hunts continued for another century, but the golden age of the Colosseum was over. The building fell into disuse, its stone quarried for other buildings, its legacy slowly transforming from a place of active horror to the silent, majestic ruin we see today. Let's re-examine your seat at the top of the arena. You are sitting on a hard stone bench, but you would have likely brought a cushion from home if you could afford one. The person next to you might be a foreigner, a sailor from Alexandria, who doesn't speak your language but who cheers and groans at the same moments you do. Below you, the crowd is a sea of color. The senators in their purple-striped togas, the wealthy equestrians with their gold rings, and the common citizens in their plain white. From your high vantage point, you see the entire social order of Rome laid out before you, a living map of power and privilege, all focused on the small oval of sand where life is cheap. The role of the lanista, the gladiator owner, was a strange one in Roman society. He was a businessman, trafficking in human lives, and was generally looked down upon by the upper classes. He was seen as a kind of pimp, profiting from death and desperation. Yet a successful lanista could become very wealthy and influential. He had to be a shrewd judge of talent, a strict disciplinarian, and a cunning negotiator when leasing his fighters to the game organizers. His entire livelihood depended on his ability to turn a desperate slave or a prisoner of war into a crowd-pleasing, profitable killing machine. It was a dark and often despised profession, but a crucial one for the entire system of the games. What happened if a gladiator refused to fight? This was the ultimate act of defiance, a rejection of the entire system. The consequences were severe. He would likely be killed on the spot, either by arena officials or by being forced into an even more hopeless situation, like facing a wild animal without a weapon. There is a famous story from the writer Symmachus about a group of German prisoners of war who were scheduled to fight as gladiators. Rather than provide entertainment for their captors, they chose to kill each other in their cells the night before the games, with the last survivor taking his own life. They chose to control their own deaths, denying the Roman crowd their spectacle. The Pompa, or opening parade, was more than just an introduction. It was a religious and civic ceremony. It was often led by the editor of the games, dressed in triumphal robes, followed by musicians, priests carrying statues of the gods, and finally the gladiators themselves. This procession linked the games to the religious traditions of Rome, framing the violence that was to come as something official, sanctioned by the state and watched over by the gods. It gave a veneer of solemnity and legitimacy to what was, at its core, a day of brutal entertainment. It was a way of making the spectacle feel like a necessary and important part of Roman life. Think about the logistics of supplying the Colosseum's animal needs. The Roman Empire had to create a vast and complex network for the capture and transport of wild animals. Entire communities in North Africa and the Middle East might have their economy based on trapping lions, leopards, and crocodiles for the arenas in Rome and other cities. These animals were then shipped in terrible conditions across the Mediterranean. The mortality rate on these journeys was extremely high. For every one animal that made it to the Colosseum, several may have died along the way. This relentless demand for exotic beasts had a devastating ecological impact, driving some species, like the North African elephant, to extinction. The concept of a good death was important in the arena. A gladiator was expected to die well, without crying out or begging for his life. If he had lost the fight and the crowd had called for his death, he was expected to accept his fate with stoicism. The victorious gladiator would deliver the final blow, and the loser was expected to take it without flinching. This was considered honorable and brave. A gladiator who died in this way would earn the respect of the crowd, even in death. It was the final performance, the last act of a show where even the way you died was part of the entertainment. The Colosseum was not the only arena in Rome, nor the only one in the empire. It was simply the biggest and most famous. Hundreds of cities across the Roman world, from Britain to Syria, had their own amphitheaters. The culture of gladiatorial games and animal hunts was widespread, a defining feature of Roman civilization. A Roman governor arriving in a newly conquered province would often build an amphitheater as one of his first acts, a way of bringing a key piece of Roman culture and social control to the new territory. The Colosseum was the model, the standard against which all other arenas were measured. Let's focus on the moments of silence. In between the roar of the crowd, the clash of weapons and the screams, there would have been brief, strange moments of quiet. The moment after a fatal blow was struck, when the crowd held its collective breath. The moment when a defeated gladiator raised his finger in surrender and the entire stadium fell silent, waiting for the emperor's decision. In these pockets of silence, the reality of the situation would have been most clear. The sun, the heat, the smell of blood, and the sight of one man holding another man's life in his hands. These quiet moments were perhaps the most intense of all. The doctors who treated the gladiators, men like the famous Greek physician Galen who served at a school in Pergamum, learned a great deal about human anatomy from their work. Because they were constantly treating traumatic injuries, they gained a practical knowledge of muscles, bones, and organs that was far beyond what most other doctors of the time possessed. In a grim irony, the violence of the arena directly contributed to the advancement of medical science. The broken bodies of the fighters became a textbook for the surgeons who were tasked with putting them back together, a brutal but effective way of learning how the human body worked. Consider the life of a secutor gladiator. His defining feature was his helmet. It was smooth and round to deflect the trident, but the two small eye holes severely restricted his vision and breathing. During a fight under the hot sun, the inside of that helmet would have become an incredibly hot, suffocating, and claustrophobic space. He would be breathing his own hot air, his sweat dripping into his eyes, his vision limited to a narrow field. The roar of the crowd would be muffled, distant. He was fighting not just his opponent, but his own equipment. It was a battle of endurance as much as skill, a test of who could withstand the personal hell inside their helmet the longest. The retiarius, or netman, was a unique figure. He was the most lightly armored of all the gladiators, and his fighting style was considered somewhat undignified by some Romans because it relied on speed and trickery rather than straightforward, heavy combat. He was often depicted as an effeminate or lower-class type of fighter. However, a skilled retiarius was a deadly opponent. His ability to control the distance of the fight and entangle his heavily armed opponents made him a fan favorite. His success was a victory for agility over brute force, a different kind of martial prowess that the crowd could appreciate. What if you got hungry or thirsty during the day? For the wealthy in the lower tiers, servants could bring them food and wine. But for the common people in the upper sections, it was a different story. You would either have to bring your own provisions or buy from the vendors outside. The Colosseum itself had fountains providing drinking water, but accessing them would mean leaving your seat and navigating the packed corridors. Food items like bread, fruit, and pastries were sold, but for many, a day at the games was a long, hot, and hungry affair, endured for the sake of the free entertainment. The legacy of the Colosseum is a dual one. On the one hand, it is a marvel of Roman engineering and architecture. Its design, with its tiered seating and numerous entrances and exits, was so effective that it still influences the design of modern stadiums today. It is a symbol of Rome's power and genius. On the other hand, it is a monument to cruelty, a place where human life was treated as a disposable commodity for the sake of entertainment. It represents the darkest aspects of Roman culture. To understand the Colosseum is to hold both of these truths in your mind at the same time, the magnificent and the monstrous. The social aspect of the games was just as important as the spectacle itself. The Colosseum was one of the few places where people from all walks of Roman life gathered together. It was a place to see and be seen, to catch up on gossip, to make business deals, and to feel part of the great collective of the city. For a day, everyone was a Roman, united in their shared experience of the games. This sense of community, forged in a place of such violence, is one of the great paradoxes of the Colosseum. It was a place that brought people together through the act of watching others be torn apart. The sand on the arena floor, the arena, is what gave amphitheaters their name. It was essential for soaking up the blood that was inevitably spilled. A layer of clean sand was laid down before each day's games to provide a fresh surface. During the day, attendants would rush out to cover fresh bloodstains with more sand, keeping the stage visually clean for the next event. The sand itself was a constantly changing canvas, recording the story of the day's violence in stains of red before being wiped clean again. The very word arena has its roots in this blood-soaked sand. Let's not forget the children. Roman children did attend the games, often with their fathers. It was considered part of their education, a way to learn about Roman values like courage, discipline, and the importance of accepting one's fate. They would have witnessed the same brutal spectacles as the adults. Seeing such violence at a young age would have been a normalizing experience, conditioning them to accept it as a standard part of their world. The games were a lesson in what it meant to be Roman, and that lesson was often a bloody one, learned from a very early age. The Colosseum's grand opening in 80 AD, under the Emperor Titus, was a spectacular event that lasted for 100 days. During this extended festival, it is said that over 9,000 animals were killed, and countless gladiatorial contests and executions took place. It was an unprecedented display of imperial generosity and power, a way for the new Flavian dynasty to win the favor of the people after the turbulent reign of Nero. The Colosseum was born in a flood of blood and spectacle, setting the standard for all the games that would follow for the next 4 centuries. Imagine the moment after a gladiator won his freedom. He is handed the rudis, the wooden sword. The crowd cheers for him. He is no longer a slave or a prisoner. He can walk out of the arena and, in theory, start a new life. But what would that life be like? He might be scarred, physically and psychologically. The only skill he knows is fighting. Some retired gladiators became trainers for new recruits. Some became bodyguards for the wealthy. But for many, the transition back into normal society, a world not governed by the simple, brutal rules of the arena, must have been incredibly difficult. Freedom was the prize, but it was not always a simple or easy one. The political messages of the games were not always subtle. During the animal hunts, exotic creatures from the farthest reaches of the empire were brought in to be slaughtered. An elephant from Africa, a tiger from Parthia, a crocodile from Egypt. This was a living, breathing map of Roman domination. It was a way of saying to the people, this is how far our power extends. We can reach into the wildest parts of the world, capture its most fearsome beasts, and bring them here for your entertainment. The animal hunts were a celebration of imperialism, a demonstration that the entire known world was subject to the will of Rome. The logistics of crowd control were a testament to Roman organization. With a capacity of at least 50,000 people, getting everyone in and out of the Colosseum efficiently was a major challenge. The building had 80 entrances at ground level, known as vomitoria. Each entrance was numbered, corresponding to the numbers on the spectators' tickets. This system allowed the massive crowd to enter the stadium and find their seats quickly, and to exit in an orderly fashion after the games. It was a system of crowd management so effective that it remains the basis for how large stadiums are designed today, a 2,000-year-old solution to a modern problem. The water organ, or hydraulis, that provided some of the music for the games was a marvel of ancient engineering. It used water pressure to force air through pipes, creating a loud, powerful sound that could be heard even over the noise of the crowd. It was a complex and expensive instrument, and its presence at the Colosseum added another layer of technological wonder to the spectacle. The sound of this organ, a beautiful and complex musical tone, accompanying acts of extreme violence, is another of the strange and unsettling contrasts that define the experience of the games. Let's reconsider the midday executions of the Noxti. While some were forced into fatal charades or thrown to beasts, another common method was to simply arm them with weapons and force them to fight each other. However, unlike the gladiators who were trained and armored, these were just condemned men. The last survivor of one pair would then be forced to fight the last survivor of another pair, and so on, until only one man was left standing. And what was his prize for surviving this ordeal? He was not granted freedom, he was simply executed by a soldier. His survival only prolonged his own terror, all for the entertainment of the lunchtime crowd. The editor, the man who sponsored the games, had to sit through the entire day's proceedings. He could not show boredom or disgust, no matter how repetitive the slaughter became. He had to be seen as enjoying the gift he was giving the people. He would often have a nomenclator, a slave whose job it was to whisper the names of important people in the crowd to him so he could greet them personally. His day was a performance, just like the gladiators, a settable. He was on a political stage, and his every reaction was being judged by the thousands of eyes watching him. The business of souvenirs was alive and well in ancient Rome. Outside the Colosseum, vendors would sell all sorts of merchandise related to the games. This included small clay lamps decorated with images of famous gladiators, figurines of fighters in various poses, and even glassware etched with scenes from the arena. People wanted to take a piece of the experience home with them, a memento of their day. A particularly successful gladiator could become a celebrity, his image adorning household items, much like a modern sports star. The commercialization of the spectacle was an integral part of its culture. The feeling of leaving the Colosseum as night fell must have been profound. You would be stepping out of a world of intense, concentrated violence and back into the relative normality of the city. The contrast would be jarring. The streets would be filled with the energy of the departing crowd, people drunkenly recounting their favorite moments. But as you made your way home, the noise would fade, and you would be left with your own thoughts, your ears still ringing. The experience would not be easy to shake off. It was designed to be overwhelming, a story you would tell for weeks to come. The sheer number of people involved in staging a single day of games is staggering. Beyond the gladiators and the, quote, editor, there were the beast handlers, the stagehands in the hypogeum, the musicians, the attendants who cleaned the sand, the guards who provided security, the sailors who operated the awning, and the slaves who catered to the wealthy. It was a small army of personnel, all working together to produce a seamless, spectacular show. The Colosseum was not just a building. It was a complex and well-oiled machine, an entertainment factory that required the labor of thousands. The Colosseum stands today as a ruin, a beautiful, broken shell of its former self. When we look at it, we are often struck by its grandeur and its age. But it is essential to remember what it was. It was not a place of honor, it was a place of organized death. The true answer to the question, could you survive a day in the Roman Colosseum, is not about physical strength or courage. It is about luck. The only way to guarantee your survival was to be lucky enough to have a ticket for a seat, and not be scheduled as part of the show. So as our journey ends, let the romantic image of the heroic gladiator fade from your mind. Replace it with the reality, the smell, the heat, the deafening noise, and the constant chilling presence of death. The Colosseum was the ultimate expression of Roman power, but it was a power built on a foundation of blood and sand. And to truly understand it is to understand that the greatest victory was not winning a fight in the arena, but simply being able to walk out of it at the end of the day, and return home. Let's deepen our understanding of the social seating. The imacavea, the lowest tier, was for the senatorial class. Above them, in the manianum primum, sat the non-senatorial noble class, the equestrians. Then came the manianum secundum, for ordinary Roman citizens, the plebeians. This section was further divided, with the wealthier citizens sitting lower than the poorer ones. At the very top, in the manianum summum in lignius, a wooden section, sat the common poor, foreigners, slaves, and women. Your view of the action directly corresponded to your social standing. It was a perfect architectural representation of the Roman social pyramid, reinforcing the rigid class structure with every event. Consider the psychological state of a new gladiator, a tiro. He might be a captured soldier from a distant land who once fought for his own people. Now he finds himself a slave in a, quote, ludus, forced to learn a new way of fighting, not for his country, but for the entertainment of his captors. He is stripped of his identity and given a new stage name. He must learn to kill, not out of hatred or duty, but as a performance. The emotional and psychological transformation required to become a gladiator, to suppress one's past and accept this new brutal reality, is one of the most tragic and overlooked aspects of their existence. The rudus, the wooden sword of freedom, was not always the end of a gladiator's career. Some free gladiators who had been awarded the rudus, known as rudiarii, chose to return to the arena. Why would they do this? The reasons varied. Some missed the fame and adoration of the crowd. For others, the prize money for a single fight could be more than a normal person earned in a year. Some may have simply found that they were unsuited for a quiet, civilian life. They were masters of a deadly craft, and the arena was the only place where their skills were truly valued. Their return was often a celebrated event, the comeback of a champion. Let's talk more about the bestiarii, the beast hunters. There were two types. The first were condemned criminals, sent into the arena with little or no protection to be killed by animals as a form of execution. The second were the professional hunters, who were trained to fight and kill the animals as a display of skill. These professionals were not considered true gladiators, and they held a lower social status, but a skilled beast hunter could still become famous. They used a variety of weapons, including spears, bows, and daggers, and sometimes worked in teams to take down larger or more dangerous animals, like elephants or rhinos. Their work was a crucial part of the morning's entertainment. The naumachia, or mock sea battle, while not held in the Colosseum after the hypogeum was built, was a spectacle of unbelievable scale when it did occur. For the Colosseum's inauguration, the floor was waterproofed and flooded, and specially constructed flat-bottomed ships were brought in. Thousands of men, usually prisoners of war or criminals, were forced to act as the sailors and marines. They would reenact famous historical naval battles, fighting to the death in the water. It was a logistical marvel, a display of engineering and wealth that no other power on earth could match. It was the ultimate expression of Rome's ability to reshape the world for its own entertainment. The role of the Vestal Virgins at the Games is a fascinating detail. These 6 priestesses, who served the goddess Vesta, were among the most revered figures in Rome. They were granted a place of honor in a special box on the main podium, directly opposite the emperor. They were some of the only women allowed to view the games from such a privileged position. Their presence added a layer of solemn religious authority to the proceedings. It was a sign that the events, however brutal, had the sanction of the Roman state religion. The pure, sacred priestesses watched over the bloody, profane spectacle. How did a fight actually end? If a gladiator was disarmed or severely wounded, he could surrender by dropping his weapon and shield and raising his index finger. This was called ad digitum. At this point, the fight stopped, and the decision on his fate was made. If he was granted missio, or mercy, he was allowed to leave the arena alive. If the verdict was death, the victorious gladiator was expected to carry it out swiftly. The loser was expected to accept the blow without resistance, often by kneeling and baring his neck. This final act of submission and courage was a crucial part of the gladiatorial code. The practice of covering blood with fresh sand was not just for appearances. It was a practical necessity. A sand surface soaked with blood would become slippery and dangerous for the fighters. The constant maintenance of the arena floor by the harenarii, the sand workers, was essential for ensuring a safe and stable footing for the combatants. This grim task, performed in the brief lulls between fights, was a constant, visible reminder of the carnage that was taking place. The audience would see the blood-soaked sand being raked and covered, only for the new surface to be stained red again just minutes later. What was the fate of the bodies? The bodies of slain gladiators were taken out through the Porta Libitinensis, the Gate of Death, named after the Roman goddess of funerals. Once outside, men dressed as Charon, the mythical ferryman of the dead, would symbolically tap them on the head with a hammer to ensure they were truly dead. From there, what happened depended on the gladiator's status. If he belonged to a, quote, collegium, a sort of burial club, his fellow gladiators would ensure he received a proper funeral. If not, his body was likely dumped unceremoniously into a mass grave or into the Tiber River, just like the criminals. The Colosseum's design included advanced features for the comfort of the spectators, at least the wealthy ones. The velarium, the massive awning that shaded the seats, was an incredible piece of engineering. It was a huge, sail-like canvas structure that was extended and retracted by a specially trained detachment of sailors from the Roman Navy. It required hundreds of men, working in unison, to operate the complex system of ropes, masts, and pulleys. This feature alone demonstrates the immense resources that were poured into making the games a more comfortable experience, highlighting the importance of the spectacle to Roman life. Let's consider the perspective of a provincial governor or magistrate. Sponsoring games was a standard way to advance one's political career. By providing the public with this popular form of entertainment, a politician could gain immense popularity, which could translate into votes or favorable appointments. The games were a form of political advertisement. A lavish and exciting set of games could make a man's reputation. A cheap or boring one could ruin it. Therefore, politicians were constantly trying to outdo one another, providing ever more spectacular and bloody shows to win the favor of the people. The financial risk for a, quote, lanista was enormous. A top gladiator was a huge investment, costing a fortune to acquire and train. If that gladiator was killed in the arena, the lanista lost his entire investment. However, if a gladiator was only wounded but spared, the editor who sponsored the games had to compensate the lanista for the damage to his property. This created a complex financial dynamic. Lanistas wanted their men to fight well enough to please the crowd and survive, while editors wanted a good show, which often meant a higher risk of death. It was a high-stakes business, built on the survival of human assets. The Thraex, or Thracian gladiator, had a distinctive set of equipment. He wore a helmet with a wide brim and a crest, often decorated with a griffin. He carried a small square shield called a parmula, and his most important weapon was the sicca, a short, curved sword. This curved blade was designed to get around the edge of an opponent's shield, making it a deadly weapon in close quarters. The Thracex was often pitted against the Marmillo or the Hoplomachus, creating a classic contest between different styles of armor and weaponry, a delight for the knowledgeable connoisseur of combat. Let's imagine the sensory experience of the hypogeum once more. It's not just the darkness and the smell, it's the feeling of the stone, damp and cold. It's the drafts of air that carry the stench of wild animals and human fear. It's the vibration of the floor when a heavy cage is being moved, or when the crowd above stomps its feet in unison. It is a world of constant, oppressive sensory input, a stark, terrifying contrast to the open-air arena above. To be stationed there for a day was to be confined to a man-made underworld, a place of pure function dedicated to feeding the spectacle above. The Colosseum was also a place for public announcements and demonstrations of imperial power. An emperor could use the games to announce a new law, celebrate a military victory, or distribute gifts to the people. Small wooden balls with tokens for prizes like food or money would sometimes be thrown into the crowd, causing a frantic scramble. This act of largesse reinforced the image of the emperor as a generous benefactor, the father of his people. The games were a multi-purpose event, combining entertainment, justice, politics, and propaganda into a single, powerful package. The fall of the Roman Empire had a direct impact on the Colosseum. As Rome's power and wealth declined, it became increasingly difficult to stage the elaborate games of the past. The complex trade networks that brought exotic animals from distant lands broke down. The state could no longer afford to sponsor such lavish spectacles. The building itself fell into disrepair. It was damaged by earthquakes and plundered for its stone and bronze, which were used to build churches and palaces. The great arena slowly transformed from a vibrant center of Roman life into the silent, majestic ruin we know today. Think about the medical supplies. The doctors treating gladiators had access to a wide range of surgical tools, including scalpels, hooks, and forceps. They used substances like vinegar to clean wounds and prevent infection. They were skilled at stitching and bandaging. However, without a modern understanding of germs or antibiotics, even a minor wound could become infected and prove fatal. A gladiator who survived the arena still faced a dangerous recovery period. His life depended on the skill of his doctor, the strength of his own constitution, and a great deal of luck. The Murmio was one of the most iconic gladiator types. His name likely came from a type of saltwater fish, and his large, crested helmet often had a fish-like shape. He carried a tall, rectangular shield like a Roman legionary, and a short, straight sword, the gladius. He was a heavyweight fighter, relying on his strong defense and powerful sword arm. His classic opponent was the Thraex or the Retiarius, matchups that pitted his heavy armor and defensive style against faster, more agile opponents. His presence in the arena was a direct link to the military image of the Roman legion. The experience of a non-Roman, a foreigner visiting the city, must have been overwhelming. Imagine seeing the Colosseum for the first time, a building larger and more complex than anything in your homeland. Imagine being part of a crowd of 50,000 people, a number greater than the entire population of many cities. Imagine witnessing the casual slaughter of animals and humans as a form of entertainment. The games would have been a powerful and terrifying display of Roman culture, a clear message of the empire's wealth, power, and fundamentally different values. It would be an experience you would never forget. The Colosseum was a self-contained world. It had its own logic, its own rules, and its own morality. Inside its walls, actions that would be considered monstrous crimes in the outside world were celebrated as entertainment. The lines between justice and cruelty, sport and execution, were blurred. For the duration of the games, the audience entered a different moral universe. To survive a day there was not just to endure the physical conditions, but to navigate this strange moral landscape, where the screams of the dying were met with the cheers of the crowd. Let's consider the source of the water for the Naumachia, the early naval battles. It was supplied by the Aqua Claudia, one of Rome's great aqueducts. A special connection was built to divert a massive amount of water directly into the arena, flooding the floor to a depth of several feet. Draining this water afterwards was an equally impressive feat of engineering, requiring a complex system of sewers beneath the arena. The ability to fill and drain a space of this size so efficiently is a stunning example of the sophistication of Roman hydraulic technology and their willingness to use it for spectacular and deadly entertainment. The life of a gladiator's family is a little-known aspect of the games. Some gladiators were married and had children. We know this from inscriptions on tombstones, where a wife or children might commission a monument to their fallen husband or father. Imagine being the wife of a gladiator. Every time he entered the arena, you would not know if he was coming home. You would live with a constant fear and uncertainty. Yet, if he was successful, you might enjoy a higher standard of living than most people of your class. It was a life of high risk and potential high reward, a constant emotional gamble. The editor of the games, the sponsor, had a special seating area called the pulvinar. This was a lavishly decorated box on the podium level, like a royal box at a modern theater. It was from here that the emperor or other high-ranking officials would watch the games and make the life or death decisions. The pulvinar was the symbolic center of power in the Colosseum. All eyes would turn to it at critical moments, waiting for the signal that would determine a man's fate. Its elevated and prominent position made it clear to everyone who was truly in charge. The role of fate and superstition was pervasive in the gladiators' world. Fighters would have their own good luck charms and rituals. They might pray to specific gods for protection, particularly Nemesis, the goddess of vengeance and divine retribution, whose shrines were often located near amphitheaters. They would also pay close attention to omens and portents. In a life so full of uncertainty and random violence, any belief that could provide a sense of control or hope, however small, would have been clung to desperately. Superstition was a psychological shield against the constant presence of death. Let's talk about the weapons. They were real, sharp, and deadly. However, they were also carefully regulated. The different gladiator types were equipped in a way that was meant to create a balanced fight. One fighter might have better armor, while another had a weapon with a longer reach. This was not a fair fight in the modern sense, but a carefully engineered contest of advantages and disadvantages. The lanista and the doctors were experts in this science of combat, training their men to maximize their own strengths while exploiting their opponent's weaknesses. This tactical element was a key part of the appeal for the more discerning members of the audience. The impact of the games on Roman literature and art was immense. Poets wrote about famous gladiators. Mosaics in wealthy homes depicted vivid scenes of combat from the arena. The imagery of the games was everywhere, from cheap clay lamps to grand public monuments. The gladiator became a powerful symbol in Roman culture, representing courage, masculinity, and a willingness to face death. This artistic and literary legacy is one of the main reasons that the image of the gladiator has remained so powerful and has so thoroughly captured the popular imagination, even 2,000 years later. The Colosseum was not just a place of death, it was also a place of life. People fell in love, made friendships, and conducted business in the stands. It was a vibrant social hub. For many Romans, particularly the poor, a day at the games was a rare opportunity for leisure and community. It was a chance to forget the hardships of their daily lives and be part of something vast and exciting. This social function is crucial to understanding why the games were so popular for so long. They were more than just a spectacle. They were a vital part of the fabric of Roman society. Think about the psychological impact on the victors. A gladiator who killed his opponent had to live with that act. While he was celebrated by the crowd, he had just taken the life of another man, someone who was in the same desperate situation as himself, someone he may have even trained with at the ludus. Some gladiators may have become hardened to the killing, seeing it as just part of the job, but others must have been haunted by what they had done. The price of their own survival was the death of a comrade in arms. This hidden mental toll is a part of their story that is rarely told. The economic ripple effect of the games was huge. It supported a wide range of industries. There was the animal trapping and shipping industry. There was the weapons and armor manufacturing industry. There were the food and drink vendors who catered to the crowds. There were the trainers, doctors, and stable hands at the gladiatorial schools. The games were a massive economic engine, creating jobs and generating wealth for many people, all of it fueled by the demand for violent spectacle. The Colosseum was not just a cultural center, it was a major driver of the Roman economy. The end of a day at the Games left the Colosseum a scene of carnage, but the cleanup crew, the slaves and workers, performed their duties with a practiced efficiency. They had to work quickly to clear the arena before nightfall. This was not just about tidiness, it was about hygiene. Leaving bodies and blood to rot in the sun would create a terrible stench and a health hazard. The grim efficiency of this cleanup operation is a testament to the routine nature of the violence. It was a daily task, like sweeping a floor or taking out the trash. But the trash in this case was the human and animal cost of the day's entertainment. The architectural genius of the Colosseum is most evident in its use of arches and concrete. Roman engineers had perfected the use of the arch, which allowed them to build a structure of this immense size that was both strong and relatively light. They also used concrete, a material they had developed, which could be poured into molds to create the massive vaults and supports. This combination of the arch and concrete was the key technological innovation that made the Colosseum possible. It was a triumph of practical engineering, a building designed for maximum capacity and efficiency. Let's consider the perspective of a Roman soldier in the crowd. He would watch the gladiatorial combat with a professional eye. He would appreciate the skill, the courage, and the tactics involved. For him, the fights might have been a kind of military demonstration, a display of the martial virtues that were at the core of the Roman identity. He would see in the gladiators a reflection of the discipline and fighting prowess of the Roman army itself. For a soldier, the games might have been less about bloodlust and more about an appreciation for the art of combat in its rawest form. The venatio, or animal hunt, could also be a display of incredible human skill. While many were just mass slaughters, some featured highly trained venatores who performed amazing feats. There are accounts of hunters who could dodge a charging bull at the last second, or archers who could shoot a running ostrich. These were the superstars of the morning show, and their skill and daring were greatly admired by the crowd. This demonstrates that the Romans could appreciate both raw, bloody spectacle and refined, athletic skill. They wanted to be entertained, and they were open to many different forms of violent performance. The Colosseum's location is significant. It was built on the site of a former lake in the gardens of Nero's Golden House. After Nero's unpopular reign and suicide, the new Flavian dynasty wanted to distance themselves from him. By building this massive public amphitheater on the site of Nero's private luxury, they were symbolically returning the land to the people of Rome. The Colosseum was a political statement from the very beginning, a monument built to win public favor and erase the memory of a hated tyrant. Its construction was a masterful piece of political propaganda. The lanista who owned the gladiators often had a familia gladiatoria, a family of fighters. This term suggests a more complex relationship than just owner and property. While the lanista's primary motivation was profit, he also had to ensure the well-being and morale of his fighters. A successful familia had a strong sense of group identity and loyalty. The gladiators were rivals in the arena, but they were also brothers in arms, living and training together, facing the same dangers. This bond of community, forged in the brutal environment of the ludus, was essential for their survival. The legal status of a gladiator was complex. Most were slaves, meaning they had no rights and were considered property. However, free men who volunteered to become gladiators, known as octorati, had to sign a contract. In this contract, they swore an oath to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to be killed by the sword. They willingly gave up their rights as citizens and submitted themselves to the absolute authority of the lanista for a set period of time. In exchange, they received a signing bonus and the chance to earn fame and fortune. It was a desperate bargain, a trade of freedom for a chance at glory. The use of scenery in the arena could be quite elaborate. For the venationes, the stagehands in the hypogeum would hoist trees, rocks, and even small hills onto the arena floor to create a convincing replica of a natural landscape. This transformed the hunt into a more theatrical event. The animals would emerge into a strange, artificial forest, and the hunters would have to track them through the scenery. This added a layer of visual spectacle and narrative to the hunt, making it more than just a simple slaughter in an open field. It was another example of the Roman genius for stagecraft. The crowd's desire for novelty was insatiable. An editor who put on the same old fights and hunts would quickly lose the crowd's interest. This drove a constant search for new and more extreme forms of spectacle. This could mean finding more exotic animals, staging fights with unusual weapon combinations, or creating more gruesome and imaginative methods of execution. The games were an entertainment industry, and like any entertainment industry, they were driven by a constant need to innovate and to top the last performance. This relentless pressure for novelty was one of the main drivers of the escalating violence and cruelty of the games. The Colosseum after the games was not entirely empty. Scavengers would descend on the arena. These might be poor people looking for anything of value that might have been left behind, or dogs and other animals drawn by the smell of blood. The area around the Colosseum at night would have been a dark and potentially dangerous place. The grand spectacle of the day would give way to the grim realities of the night, a reminder of the poverty and desperation that coexisted with the grand wealth and power of the Roman Empire. The roar of the crowd in the Colosseum was a physical force. With 50,000 people or more shouting at once, the sound would have been deafening, a wave of noise that you could feel in your chest. Modern acoustic studies of the Colosseum's design suggest that it was remarkably effective at amplifying and projecting sound. This meant that the cheers, the boos, and the screams were all part of a carefully managed sensory experience. The sound was an instrument of the spectacle, used to build excitement, express judgment, and unite the thousands of individuals into a single powerful mob. The role of the referee, or summa rudis, was crucial in a gladiatorial match. He was usually a retired gladiator himself, and he carried a long staff, or rudis, to enforce the rules. He would step in to separate fighters if they were locked in a stalemate, or to declare a winner if one fighter was clearly incapacitated. He was the on-the-ground authority, ensuring that the fight proceeded according to the accepted rules of combat. His presence indicates that these were not lawless brawls, but highly regulated contests, with established procedures and officials to oversee them. The psychological conditioning of the animals for the Venationes must have been a key part of the preparation. The animals were not just released, they were often starved and prodded to make them more aggressive. They were kept in darkness and then suddenly thrust into blinding light to disorient and anger them. The handlers, the venatores, were skilled in animal psychology, knowing how to provoke a charge or a defensive reaction. The goal was to overcome the animal's natural instinct to flee and force it to perform for the crowd by fighting back. It was a cruel manipulation of animal behavior for the sake of a better show. Let's think about the moment a gladiator saw the hypogeum for the first time. He would be led down a ramp from the sunlit world into this dark, subterranean labyrinth. The change in atmosphere would be immediate and shocking. The cool, damp air, the smell of fear and filth, the cacophony of animal and human noises. It would be a descent into an underworld. This first experience of the backstage area would be a powerful psychological blow, a clear and terrifying introduction to the world he was now a part of. It was the place where the illusion of the games was stripped away, revealing the grim machinery beneath. The Colosseum was also a place of fashion. For the wealthy, attending the games was an opportunity to display their finest clothes and jewelry. A wealthy woman, even though seated in the upper tiers, would be dressed in colorful silks and adorned with gold. A senator would wear his finest toga with its purple stripe. It was a social occasion, and people dressed accordingly. The stands of the Colosseum would have been a sea of color and style, a stark contrast to the dust and blood of the arena floor. It was a place where social status was performed and displayed for all to see. The Octoratus, the free man who volunteered to be a gladiator, presents a fascinating psychological case. He was often a man who had nothing to lose, a disgraced soldier, a man deep in debt, or someone from a poor background with no other prospects. By taking the gladiator's oath, he was essentially committing a form of social suicide, giving up his rights and status as a citizen. But in doing so, he gained the possibility of a new kind of status, one based on martial prowess and fame. It was a desperate gamble, a choice made by men who felt that a short, glorious life in the arena was better than a long, miserable one outside it. The Christian martyrs who were executed in the Colosseum and other arenas became powerful symbols for the growing religion. Their willingness to die for their faith, rather than renounce it, was seen as the ultimate act of devotion. The stories of their martyrdom, often embellished and romanticized, were told and retold, inspiring others and helping to spread the Christian faith. The arena, intended by the Roman state to be a place to suppress and eliminate this new religion, ironically became one of the most powerful stages for its promotion. The blood of the martyrs, as the saying goes, became the seed of the church. Let's consider the wind in the Colosseum. On a breezy day, the massive velarium would have billowed and snapped, the sound adding to the general noise. The wind would also carry the smells of the arena, the blood, the incense, the perfumes, across the crowd. It might provide a welcome moment of coolness on a hot day, or it could carry a fine spray of dust and sand into your face. The weather was an active participant in the day's events, an unpredictable element that could affect the comfort of the crowd and even the conditions of the fights on the floor below. The Darius was a type of gladiator who fought from a war chariot, in the style of the ancient Britons. This was likely a rare and specialized type of combat, perhaps brought back to Rome after the conquest of Britain. 2 men would be on the chariot, one driving and one fighting with a spear and sword. This would have been a spectacular and chaotic form of combat, with the chariots thundering around the arena. It was another example of the Roman fascination with exotic and foreign fighting styles, which they adopted and incorporated into the spectacle of the games. The Colosseum's drainage system was a marvel. Beneath the hypogeum, there was a network of large sewers. These were not only used to drain the water from the early naval battles, but also to wash away the blood and filth from the regular games. After a day's events, the arena floor could be flushed with water, which would then run into these drains, cleaning the area for the next day. This attention to sanitation, even in a place of such brutality, is a hallmark of Roman pragmatism and engineering skill. They had created a factory of death, and they knew how to clean it efficiently. As we conclude our deep dive, the central question remains: what does the Colosseum tell us about the Romans? It shows us a people who were capable of incredible genius and organization, but also of shocking cruelty. It shows us a society that was deeply concerned with law and order, but that made public executions a form of entertainment. It shows us a culture that valued courage and martial skill, but that exploited slaves and prisoners for sport. The Colosseum is the ultimate Roman paradox, a monument of magnificent brutality that continues to fascinate and horrify us to this day. The variety of gladiatorial pairings was a science. Some matchups were designed to be crowd pleasers, full of action and drama. Others were more tactical, a thinking man's fight. The lanista and the editor would work together to create a menu for the day's combat, ensuring a good rhythm and flow. They wouldn't want 2 slow defensive fights in a row. They would mix it up, following a plodding heavyweight bout with a fast, agile contest between 2 lightly armed fighters. This careful curation of the violence was key to keeping the massive audience engaged and entertained for the entire duration of a long, hot afternoon. Let's imagine the life of the summa rudis, the referee. He was a man who had survived the arena, won his freedom, and now stood on the sand once more, not as a combatant, but as an authority figure. He would have an intimate understanding of the fight, knowing the tricks, the techniques, and the signs of fatigue or fear. His presence was a symbol of hope to the fighters. a living example that survival and even a form of respected retirement were possible. He was the keeper of the rules, a thin line of order in the midst of sanctioned chaos, his own life, a testament to the strange meritocracy of the arena. The greaves, or shin guards, worn by many gladiators were more important than they might seem. The lower legs were a common and easy target in a fight. A solid blow to the shin could cripple an opponent, ending the fight instantly. The greaves, made of metal and often decorated, provided crucial protection for this vulnerable area. The specific style of greave could also help identify the gladiator type. For example, the hoplomachus wore high greaves that went up to his knees, while other types wore shorter ones. Every piece of equipment had a specific, practical purpose, honed over years of deadly trial and error. The connection between the games and the Roman military was deep and complex. The gladiatorial fighting styles were often based on the fighting techniques of Rome's enemies, like the Gauls, Thracians, or Samnites. In a way, the arena was a place where Rome could reenact its military victories, with a Roman-style gladiator, like the secutor or myrmio, often defeating a, quote, barbarian-style opponent. It was a form of living propaganda, constantly reminding the populace of the superiority of Roman arms and the subjugation of their enemies. The games were a continuation of war by other means. The Colosseum was not just for games. In the centuries after the games ceased, the building was adapted for various purposes. Its vaulted arches were used as workshops, housing, and even a fortress for a powerful Roman family. A small chapel was built into the structure. This long period of adaptation and reuse is what helped the building to survive. It was never just an abandoned relic. It was an active part of the city's life for over 1,000 years. Its history did not end with the last gladiator. It simply entered a new and much quieter chapter. Let's consider the diet of the exotic animals. Keeping thousands of beasts from all over the world fed was a massive logistical challenge. The Romans had to import or procure huge quantities of meat for the carnivores and fodder for the herbivores. This created another industry around the games, that of animal husbandry and supply. The area around the Colosseum would have included massive pens and storage facilities for the animals and their food. The sheer amount of resources required to keep this menagerie alive until it was time for it to be killed is another indicator of the immense scale of the operation. The concept of infamia, or legal infamy, was central to the social standing of gladiators and actors. These professions were considered dishonorable, and those who practiced them were subject to infamia. This meant they lost many of the rights of a citizen. They could not vote, hold public office, or, in some cases, even make a will. They existed in a strange legal gray area, celebrated for their performances, but despised for their profession. This paradox highlights the deep-seated Roman prejudice against any form of public performance for pay, which was seen as a kind of prostitution of one's body. The retirement of a famous gladiator was a major public event. He might be awarded the rudis in a special ceremony in the arena, in front of the cheering crowd. His freedom was a powerful story, a real-life example of the Roman dream, that even a slave could achieve fame and liberty through courage and skill. These retired champions were living legends, and their stories would be told and retold, inspiring new generations of fans and fighters. They were the exceptions that proved the rule, their rare success serving to justify the brutal system for everyone else. The underground elevators, or, quote, pegmata, in the hypogeum were not just for hoisting animals and gladiators. They were also used for scenery. In some elaborate shows, entire painted backdrops or complex stage sets could be raised into the arena, transforming the space in a matter of moments. One moment it could be an open field, the next a forest, the next a mythical landscape. This capacity for rapid dramatic scene changes made the Colosseum a true theater, capable of a range of spectacular effects that would not be seen again on such a scale until the modern era. The role of humor in the games should not be underestimated. Alongside the grim violence, there were often moments of comedy. This could include clowns or jesters performing in the intervals. Sometimes, the animal hunts themselves could have a comedic element, with harmless animals being chased by dwarves or other unusual figures. This mixing of horror and humor can seem strange to us, but it was a key part of the experience. It provided emotional relief and variety, ensuring that the crowd's mood did not become too dark or somber. It was all part of the package of panem et circenses, bread and circuses. The gladiatorial schools, the ludi, were not all the same. There were 4 large imperial schools in Rome itself, located near the Colosseum. These were state-run institutions that trained the best fighters for the most important games. But there were also many smaller, privately owned ludi throughout Italy and the provinces. The quality of the training and the living conditions could vary greatly. A gladiator in a top imperial school would have had better food, medical care, and training than one in a small backwater ludus. His chances of survival and success were directly tied to the prestige and resources of the school he belonged to. Let's think about the emotional journey of a spectator over the course of the day. It would be a roller coaster. The morning might bring the thrill and disgust of the animal hunts. The midday would bring the grim, somber mood of the executions. The afternoon would bring the suspense, excitement, and vicarious thrill of the gladiatorial combat. A spectator would experience a wide range of powerful emotions: awe, pity, fear, joy, and bloodlust. The games were designed to be an overwhelming emotional experience, leaving the audience drained but satisfied at the end of the day. The parmula, the small shield used by the Thraex, offered very little protection compared to the large scutum of a Murmillo. This meant the Thraex had to rely on speed, agility, and his skill at parrying with his shield and weapon. His fighting style was one of active, mobile defense, constantly moving to avoid being cornered by his heavier opponent. This made fights involving a Thraex exciting and dynamic, a classic contest between a tank and a rogue, a dynamic that is still popular in games and stories today. The Romans understood the appeal of the underdog and the nimble fighter. The graffiti found in Pompeii and other Roman cities gives us a fascinating glimpse into the fan culture surrounding the games. Fans would scrawl the names of their favorite gladiators on walls, often with details of their record, like Celadus the Thracian, the girls, Heartthrob. This is the ancient equivalent of a modern sports fan wearing a team jersey or having a poster of their favorite player. It shows that gladiators were true celebrities with dedicated fan bases who followed their careers, debated their skills, and mourned their deaths. This fan culture was a vital, grassroots part of the world of the games. The Colosseum's elliptical shape is a key part of its design genius. A circular arena would have created some seats with a poor view of the action. An ellipse, on the other hand, brings all the spectators closer to the center, ensuring a good view from almost every seat. It also creates a dynamic, flowing space without the hard corners of a rectangular stadium. This focus on the spectator's experience, the desire to give everyone the best possible view of the carnage, is a telling detail about the priorities of the Roman engineers and their patrons. Financial arrangements for a gladiator's death were grimly practical. If a gladiator was killed in a fight, the editor who sponsored the games had to pay the lanista his full price, which could be a huge sum for a champion fighter. This was a major disincentive for an editor to demand death too often. However, if the gladiator was only wounded, the editor only had to pay a rental or damages fee. This created a system where mercy was often the more economically sensible option, a strange form of life insurance that protected the lanista's investment and may have saved many gladiators' lives. Let's consider the wind and its effect on a retiarius. For the netman, a strong or unpredictable wind could be a disaster. It could catch his net as he threw it, sending it off target and leaving him vulnerable. He would have to be a master of reading the air currents within the massive stadium, adjusting his throw to account for the wind's direction and strength. This is another small, easily overlooked detail that added a layer of complex skill to the combat. The best fighters were not just masters of their weapons, they were masters of their environment. The Colosseum in the Middle Ages became a place of myth and legend. It was sometimes thought to be a temple to the sun, or a palace of the emperors filled with hidden treasure. Pilgrims visiting Rome would look upon the massive ruin with awe and fear, telling stories of the ghosts of gladiators who still haunted its corridors. The building's original purpose was partially forgotten, and it took on a new life in the imagination of the people, a mysterious and magical place that hinted at the lost power and glory of the ancient empire. The provocateur, or challenger, was a type of gladiator that was unique because he only ever fought against other provocateurs. They were equipped much like a Roman legionary, with a rectangular shield, a helmet with a visor, a sword, and a chestplate. Their fights were a mirror match, a pure test of skill between two identically equipped fighters. This was a favorite of connoisseurs of combat, as it removed the variable of different equipment and came down to the pure skill, strength, and strategy of the two men. It was the closest the arena came to a, quote, level playing field. The silence of the hypogeum must have been the most terrifying sound. Imagine a gladiator waiting in a side tunnel for his turn in the elevator. He has been in the noisy, chaotic holding area, but now he is alone for a few moments. The distant roar of the crowd is a muffled drone. In this brief quiet, his own heartbeat would sound like a drum. He would be alone with his fear and his thoughts, just moments before being lifted into the blinding light and the deafening noise of the arena. This moment of profound, terrifying silence before the storm is the essence of the gladiator's psychological ordeal. The Cena Libera, or free dinner, was a public banquet held the night before the games. The gladiators who were scheduled to fight the next day would be fed a lavish meal, and the public was allowed to come and watch them eat. It was a strange, voyeuristic event. For the fans, it was a chance to see their heroes up close. For the gladiators, it was a last meal for some, a chance to enjoy good food and wine before facing death. It was another part of the ritual and build-up to the games, a public display that humanized the fighters just before they were to be dehumanized in the arena. The sheer weight of the scutum, the large rectangular shield of the murmillo or secutor, was a weapon in itself. It could weigh over 20 pounds. A fighter had to have incredible upper body and core strength just to carry it for the duration of a fight. He could use its weight to punch and shove his opponent, a technique called a shield boss. A well-placed shield bash could knock an opponent off balance or even break bones. The shield was not just a defensive tool, it was an integral part of the gladiator's offensive arsenal. The Colosseum was a powerful symbol of Roman identity. In a vast and diverse empire, the games were one of the few cultural touchstones that united people from Britain to Egypt. Whether you were a citizen in Rome or a soldier on the frontier, you understood the world of the arena. It was a shared cultural language. This helped to create a sense of Romanness across the empire, binding its disparate peoples together through a common passion for this unique and brutal form of entertainment. Let's revisit the moment of surrender. When a gladiator raised his finger, he was not just giving up, he was making a profound statement of trust. He was trusting in the system, in the crowd, and in the editor to judge his performance fairly and grant him his life if he had earned it. It was an appeal to the unwritten rules of the game. For this system to work, that trust had to be honored more often than not. If fighters believed that surrender always meant death, they would fight to the bitter end, which would result in less dramatic, less satisfying contests and more dead gladiators. Mercy was good for business. The spoila, the armor and weapons of a defeated gladiator, were valuable. If the gladiator was killed, his equipment was collected and returned to the lanista. It was part of the lanista's capital stock. This meant that the armor you saw on one gladiator might have been worn by several others before him, a silent testament to the men who had fought and died in it. The equipment itself had a history, passed down from one fighter to the next, a grim inheritance in a world where life was fleeting, but a good piece of armor was a lasting asset. The social stigma of being a, quote, lanista was so strong that they were often buried outside the main city cemeteries, in their own separate plots, alongside other infames like actors and prostitutes. This shows how deeply Roman society looked down on those who profited from what were considered shameful professions. Even in death, they were segregated from respectable society. This makes the wealth and influence that some lanistas achieved all the more remarkable. They were rich and powerful outcasts, operating on the fringes of the society that both craved and despised their product. The Colosseum's outer wall is a study in classical orders. The ground floor arches are framed by Tuscan columns, a simple, strong Roman style. The second floor uses the more elegant Ionic order, and the third floor uses the ornate Corinthian order. This progression from simple and strong at the bottom to light and decorative at the top was a classic feature of Roman architecture. It created a visual effect of harmony and sophistication, a beautiful and orderly facade for the chaotic and violent events that took place within. The building's exterior was a mask of civilized elegance. Imagine being a doctor in a sanitarium, the Gladiator hospital. Your patients would have horrific injuries, wounds that would kill most ordinary men. You would have to work quickly and decisively, with limited tools and no anesthesia. You would become an expert in trauma care out of sheer necessity. You would also form relationships with these fighters, seeing their courage and their fear up close. You would be in the business of patching up men so they could go out and be broken again. It must have been a profession filled with immense stress, clinical challenges, and profound moral ambiguity. The decay of the Colosseum in the post-Roman era was slow and dramatic. Its iron clamps, which held the stones together, were prized for their metal and were hacked out, leaving the pockmarks we see today. It was used as a quarry, its perfectly cut travertine blocks carted away to build some of Rome's most famous Renaissance and Baroque landmarks. The great arena was cannibalized by the city it once served, its own body used to build a new Rome. This long, slow process of decay and reuse is as much a part of its history as the games themselves. Final thought on survival is this. The question is not just physical, but moral. Could you sit in a crowd of 50,000 people and cheer for the death of another human being? Could you watch a man be torn apart by a lion and see it as entertainment? Could your sense of empathy and humanity survive a day in a place where cruelty was the main attraction? The deepest challenge of the Colosseum is not to our physical endurance, but to our moral core. And that is a question that echoes from the ancient sand to our modern world. The sand in the arena served another, more symbolic purpose. It represented the earth, a neutral ground where disputes could be settled. In a society as hierarchical as Rome, the arena was, in theory, a place where a slave could defeat a free man, where skill could overcome social standing. The sand was a great equalizer. Once a gladiator stepped onto it, his life was determined not by his birth, but by his performance. This ideal of the arena as a level playing field was a powerful myth, even if the reality was that the entire system was built on exploitation and inequality. Let's consider the career path of a successful gladiator. After a few victories, a Tiro novice would become a veteranus. With more victories, he could achieve a high rank within his familia and earn a higher salary. The most successful were the primus palis, the top-ranked gladiators of their school. These were the superstars, the men whose names were household words. Their success brought them wealth, fame, and the adoration of the public. They were the living embodiment of the gladiatorial dream, their celebrity serving to obscure the grim reality for the vast majority of their fellow fighters. The Porta Triumphalis, the Triumphal Gate, was the main entrance through which the gladiators made their opening procession. It was the gate of life, and spectacle. At the other end of the arena was the, quote, Porta Libitinensis, the Gate of Death. The fighters would enter through one gate full of hope and purpose, and the dead would be dragged out through the other. The very architecture of the Colosseum was a map of the two possible outcomes of a gladiator's life. The short distance between those two gates represented the razor's edge on which every fighter lived. The psychological toll on the animals is something we can only imagine. The stress of capture, the horror of the sea voyage in a cramped cage, the confinement in the dark, noisy hypogeum. By the time an animal reached the arena, it was already traumatized and terrified. This was not a contest between a man and a wild beast in its natural state. It was a contest between a man and a psychologically broken creature, driven mad by fear and confusion. This makes the Venationes even more tragic. It was not a hunt. It was the final act of a long and cruel torture. The Colosseum's influence on Christianity was not limited to martyrdom. As the church grew in power, it actively sought to suppress the pagan culture that the games represented. The closing of the gladiatorial schools and the banning of the games was a major victory for the church in its struggle against the old Roman ways. In later centuries, the Colosseum was consecrated as a holy site, a memorial to the Christian martyrs who had died there. The transformation of this pagan temple of death into a Christian symbol of faith is one of the most remarkable reversals in history. The Roman audience was not a passive consumer of violence. They were connoisseurs. They understood the nuances of the different fighting styles, the strategies involved in each pairing. They could appreciate a clever defensive move as much as a dramatic killing blow. A gladiator who was clumsy or unskilled would be booed and mocked, regardless of his bravery. The crowd demanded a high level of technical skill. They were not just there to see blood. They were there to see the art of killing performed by masters of their craft. The retiarius and his net were often the subject of jokes and scorn from Roman traditionalists. The net was not seen as a manly Roman weapon like the sword. His lack of armor and his reliance on speed were viewed as un-Roman. This social prejudice against the net fighter made his victories all the more spectacular. When a nimble, nearly naked retiarius managed to trap and defeat a heavily armed murmillo, it was a dramatic upset, a victory of cunning over brute strength that the crowd found irresistible. He was the perpetual underdog. The economic impact of a single munus, or set of games, on a city could be enormous. It would bring in visitors from the surrounding countryside who would need food, drink, and lodging. The demand for local goods and services would skyrocket. Sponsoring games was a way for an editor to not only gain political favor, but also to provide a significant economic stimulus to his community. The games were a form of ancient tourism, a major event that the entire local economy could revolve around for a few days. Let's think about the end of a gladiator's day. If he survived, he would return to the ludus. His wounds would be treated. He would be given a meal. He would be surrounded by his fellow fighters, some celebrating their own survival, others mourning a fallen comrade. The atmosphere would be a strange mix of relief, exhaustion, and grief. They had survived one more day, but they knew they would have to do it all again. The life of a gladiator was a relentless cycle of fear, violence, and fleeting survival. The Colosseum was a statement of permanence. It was built of travertine stone and concrete to last for eternity, a monument to the everlasting power of Rome. Ironically, its current state as a ruin is what makes it so powerful today. It is a reminder that no empire, no matter how powerful, is truly eternal. Its broken arches and weathered stones speak to us not of everlasting glory, but of the passage of time, the rise and fall of civilizations, and the enduring power of history to humble even the proudest of human achievements. The Hellenista had to be a master of human psychology. He had to know how to motivate men who lived under the constant threat of death. He had to know when to use discipline and when to use reward. He had to build a sense of loyalty and professionalism in a group of desperate men. He was part coach, part prison warden, part businessman. The success of his familia depended entirely on his ability to manage the complex emotional and psychological needs of his fighters, turning them from terrified slaves into confident, effective performers. The sheer logistics of the inaugural games in 80 AD are mind-boggling. To procure 9,000 animals and enough gladiators and criminals for 100 straight days of spectacle required an empire-wide effort of coordination. It was a declaration to the world of the administrative competence of the new Flavian dynasty. It showed that Rome could not only conquer the world, but could also manage it with terrifying efficiency, all in the service of providing entertainment for its citizens. The opening games were the ultimate demonstration of Rome's logistical might. The Sacramentum Gladiatorium, the gladiator's oath, was a legally binding contract. By taking it, a volunteer surrendered his body and his life to his master. He was no longer a person in the eyes of the law, but a thing to be used. This voluntary submission to a state of slavery is one of the most difficult things for a modern mind to comprehend. It speaks to the desperation of the people who made this choice, and to the powerful allure of the arena, which offered a chance, however slim, to escape a life of poverty and obscurity. Let's think about the moment after a victory. The successful gladiator is standing over his defeated opponent. The crowd is roaring his name. Adrenaline is coursing through his veins. In that moment, he must feel like a god. He has faced death and triumphed. He is the center of the universe for 50,000 people. This powerful, intoxicating feeling of glory is what drove many fighters. It was a drug, and the only place to get it was on the sand. This addictive rush of victory was perhaps the strongest chain that bound a gladiator to his violent life. The Colosseum was not soundproof. The noise from within would have spilled out into the surrounding neighborhoods. The roars of the crowd, the blare of the trumpets, the screams of the dying. The entire city would have been aware when the games were on. It was an unavoidable presence, a constant reminder of the spectacle at the city's heart. You could not live in Rome and be ignorant of the Colosseum. Its sounds were part of the soundtrack of the city itself. The legacy of Roman concrete is all around us. The recipe, which often included volcanic ash, created a material that was incredibly durable and could even set underwater. The concrete vaults and arches of the Colosseum are what have allowed the structure to survive for 2 millennia, withstanding earthquakes and the ravages of time. This secret of Roman engineering was lost for centuries after the fall of the empire, and its rediscovery was a key part of the Renaissance. The Colosseum is a monument not just to spectacle, but to a lost technological genius. The gladiator was the ultimate outsider. He was a slave, a criminal, a foreigner, or a social outcast. He was legally infamous, and yet he could achieve a level of celebrity and adoration that was denied to most respectable citizens. This paradox is central to his appeal. He was both despised and worshipped, a figure who existed outside the normal rules of society. He was a dangerous and transgressive figure, and that was a key part of his charisma. He represented a fantasy of freedom from social conventions, even as he lived a life of total bondage. The final cleanup of the arena at night was a somber affair. Under the light of torches, the last of the day's debris was cleared away. The gates were locked. The great building fell silent, save for the wind whistling through its empty arches. In this silence, the Colosseum would have felt like a great, sleeping beast, resting after its frenzy. It was a place charged with the psychic energy of the day's events, a vast and empty stage haunted by the ghosts of all who had fought and died there. So when we look at the ruins of the Colosseum today, we should see more than just stones. We should see the faces of the crowd, from the senator to the slave. We should hear the sounds, from the trumpets to the screams. We should smell the odors of sweat, perfume, and blood. We should feel the heat of the sun and the chill of the hypogeum. To truly understand the Colosseum is to populate it with the life that once filled it, in all its brilliance, complexity, and horror. Ultimately, the survival of the Colosseum itself is its final, greatest story. It has survived the fall of the empire that built it. It has survived earthquakes, fires, and centuries of neglect and plunder. It has survived its transformation from a pagan arena to a Christian shrine, from a fortress to a quarry. It stands today as a silent witness to 2,000 years of human history, a symbol not just of the glory and cruelty of Rome, but of the enduring power of the past to shape and haunt the present.